My name is Natalie Carter, and the last words I ever expected to hear from my own mother were the ones that almost ended my life. Do it, Mark. End her. She said it calmly, like she was asking someone to pass the salt while my stepfather Harold leveled a gun at my head. My younger brother Mark stood over me, fists still dripping with my blood ready to finish what they had started. All of this, every bruise, every drop of blood, because I refused to sign a mortgage deed that would erase me from the only home my father ever built. I looked at the table where the paper lay, the wood scarred with marks from when my father once fixed old radios on Sunday afternoons. That home was more than lumber and nails. It was memory belonging proof that I was part of something real. But to them, I was nothing. They had already cut me out of family photographs, silenced me at memorials, called me unstable, dramatic, too much. Now they wanted my name erased from the deed, erased from my father's legacy, erased from existence itself. My stepfather's finger curled on the trigger. My mother's eyes were glass, and Mark's voice shook as he growled, "Just sign, Natalie. Just sign and it's over." But it was never going to be over. And in that moment, broken and bleeding on the floor, the only question that filled my mind was this. If I had signed, would I still be alive to tell you this story? I grew up in a house that smelled of cedar and lemon oil, a house my father Thomas Carter built with his own two hands long before I was born. Every corner of that place carried his fingerprints from the staircase he sanded smooth to the porch swing he hung with chains that squeaked every summer evening. When I was little, I used to sit with him in the garage as he tinkered with radios, the sound of his humming louder than the static, and he would look at me with that proud half-smile and say, "Natalie, you're stronger than you think." Back then, I believed him because in his eyes, I always mattered. But everything changed after he died. I was 23 when he passed, and within a year, my mother Linda remarried Harold, a man with a sharp jaw, sharp words, and a sharper need for control. He moved into the house as if he had always owned it, rearranging furniture, demanding silence during his evening news, dictating what money should be spent and on whom. My brother Mark was younger than me, just barely 20, and at first, he seemed lost like I was, but it didn't take long before Harold filled that emptiness with poison. I watched Mark shift from the boy who once begged me to help him with math homework into the man who echoed Harold's scornful tone. Natalie is dramatic. Natalie overreacts. Natalie doesn't really belong here. Those were words whispered in hallways, muttered under breaths, repeated until my mother began to nod along as though she'd always believed them. It was subtle at first, the erasures. A family photo hung in the hallway where my image was cut out. An invitation to Thanksgiving that somehow never reached me. A slideshow at Christmas that rolled by without a single picture of me, though I had been there every year until Dad's last. The sting wasn't just in the omission, but in the look my mother gave me whenever I asked why. A look that said, "Don't start, don't cause a scene." For years, I clung to the tangible proof that I belonged in that house. Receipts from when I paid property taxes the year my dad got sick, utility bills I covered after his funeral, little notes he left tucked inside his toolboxes. Those papers became my armor hidden in a manila folder buried beneath unpaid invoices in my apartment. Sometimes I would pull it out, touch the faded ink, and remind myself that I wasn't invisible, even if they wanted me to be. Still, the house pulled at me. Springfield summers were sticky humid, the kind of air that clung to your skin. And sometimes I would drive by the old place just to see the porch light glowing, just to remember the smell of lemon oil after Dad polished the floors on Saturdays. I told myself it was still mine in some way, that blood and memory meant more than signatures and threats. But as the years passed, my place there shrank until it felt like I was haunting a life I once lived. By the time the email from Mark arrived subject line family meeting urgent, I already knew deep down it wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. The message was cold. No greeting, no, "How have you been?" Just a command to show up at the house Tuesday at 5. Harold and I will explain. That was it. The moment I read it, I knew whatever explanation they had prepared wasn't going to end with me being seen as family again. It was going to be another cut, another erasure, another way to prove that my father's voice telling me I belonged was nothing but a fading echo. And yet I went, because part of me still believed in the house, in the smell of cedar, in the memory of his hand steadying mine. Because some foolish part of me thought if I showed them the receipts, the proof, the folder, maybe they would remember that I was more than a ghost they wanted gone. When Tuesday arrived, the air was heavy with the kind of humidity that clings long after you've stepped indoors, and as I walked up to the house, my chest tightened with the memory of Dad sanding those porch steps, the same boards now creaking under Harold's boots pacing inside. I knocked once, the smell of cedar faint, but still there, a ghost of my childhood, and when the door opened, my brother Mark barely looked at me. His eyes slid away, shoulders stiff, and he muttered, "You're late," before stepping aside. Inside, the dining table that once held birthday cakes and messy science projects was now cleared, polished, and occupied by Harold in a pressed shirt and tie, and my mother Linda sitting perfectly straight with her hands folded like she was attending church. A stranger in a cheap suit sat with a briefcase open, papers stacked neatly in front of him. "Have a seat," my mother said, her voice syrupy but firm, as though daring me to refuse. I sat, my palms sweating, my eyes drawn to the 3 cups of coffee on the table, all steaming, none for me. The lawyer cleared his throat and spoke with a practiced tone. "Ms. Carter, we are here to finalize an urgent adjustment to the mortgage." My stomach dropped. Mortgage. Harold slid a thick document across the table, the notary seal pressed deep into the corner, and at the bottom my father's name scrawled in pen that didn't look like his at all. It was off the tilt, the spacing, the hesitation in each letter. "Did Dad sign this before he passed?" I asked, voice shaking. Linda didn't blink, only smiled thinly. "Of course he did. You know how he always cared about family, about making sure we were stable." Mark wouldn't look at me, his jaw tight, his fingers drumming on the table. Harold leaned back and said, "This is just a formality. You're not really in a position to delay, are you? Natalie, you don't even live here." My throat closed. I had paid taxes. I had the receipts in my folder tucked into my bag, proof that I mattered, but in that moment they made me feel like a trespasser in my own life. Linda's voice grew sharp colder. "There is no time. If you don't sign today, we could lose the house. Think about your brother. Think about this family." Gaslighting, the word, flickered in my brain, even as her eyes bored into me as if love and obligation were weapons pointed at my chest. I pushed the paper back, my fingers trembling, and whispered, "I need time to think." "That's not an option." Harold snapped, his voice like a door slamming shut. "Sign it or you will regret this." I stood the chair scraping loudly against the polished floor, a sound too loud for a house that once held laughter, and I said, "I'm not signing anything today." Their silence followed me like a shadow as I left the sound of my own breathing ragged in the humid night. But the exclusion didn't end there. 2 days later, at my father's memorial service organized without me, I stood in the back of the hall as people sipped punch and watched a slideshow of his life. There was Linda holding his hand at the hospital bed, Mark smiling beside him at Christmas Herald, even appearing in the later photos, but not one image of me. I flipped through the program they handed me and searched for my name, but it wasn't there. When the open mic portion began, I walked to the front heart, pounding a memory of fixing the lawnmower with Dad ready on my tongue, grease on our hands, laughter in our throats. But as I reached for the microphone, Linda stepped forward, her hand firm on the mic. "Let's keep this about your father," she said softly but firmly, and the crowd murmured in polite agreement as I froze, humiliated, before walking back to the shadows. That night in my rented room, I opened an old photo album, my fingers resting on the picture of 7-year-old me sitting on Dad's lap in front of the fireplace, my head tilted toward him as if he hung the moon. I whispered into the quiet, "You still see me, don't you, Dad?" But there was no answer. Only the heavy truth that the people I should have been able to call family had already decided I didn't exist. The humiliation of being silenced at my father's memorial lingered in my bones long after the crowd dispersed, long after I stood at the back clutching a paper cup of watered-down punch, while people I had known my whole life walked past me as if I were invisible. I went home that night and sat on the floor of my apartment surrounded by the folder I had carried to the meeting, the receipts, the tax slips, the utility bills. I had paid the evidence that I had existed in that house, that I had carried responsibility when no one else had. I stared at them until dawn, until the ink blurred with exhaustion, and told myself that proof would matter, that truth would weigh heavier than lies. But days later, when Mark sent another message, cold and clipped, saying, "You need to come back. We can't wait anymore," I felt my stomach twist because I knew what it meant. They weren't done. They wanted me back at the house, and this time it wouldn't be just signatures and sneers. I told myself I could stand firm, that I could walk in, show them the folder, and remind them I wasn't an afterthought. But the moment I stepped onto the porch, the air thick with that familiar cedar scent, now tainted with dread, I realized it was already too late. Harold stood by the table again, but this time his presence filled the room like a storm cloud, his eyes fixed on me like I was prey. Linda was there too, her hair pulled tight, her expression sharp as glass. Mark hovered near the kitchen counter, his fists clenched at his sides, veins standing out against his skin. The paper lay on the table, already flattened, a pen resting neatly on top, as if they expected me to fold without a word. Harold spoke first, his tone flat. "You're going to sign this today, Natalie. Enough games." My throat tightened, my hands gripping the folder at my side, and I said, "I'm not signing away Dad's house. His name is on the deed, and so is mine." Linda's eyes flashed, her voice cutting like a whip. "Don't be so dramatic. You're tearing this family apart. Can't you see we're just trying to survive?" It was the same script she had always used, turning her choices into my blame, her betrayals into my shame. I shook my head, my voice trembling but steady. Surviving doesn't mean erasing me. It doesn't mean pretending I don't exist. Mark slammed his fist against the counter, the sound cracking through the room, and shouted, "You don't live here. You don't belong here. You're selfish, Natalie. You've always been selfish." His words hit harder than the noise, because once upon a time he had been my little brother who begged me to braid his hair for school pictures, who ran to me after nightmares. Now his face was red with rage, his loyalty chained to Harold's control, his mouth spitting the venom Harold had fed him for years. Harold leaned forward, the veins in his neck taut, and said, "This isn't about you. It never was. You're weak, Natalie. You've always been the weak link." My chest burned with fury, but I forced myself to meet his eyes, saying, "Weak? I paid the bills when Dad was too sick to work. I was there when he died, not you." "Where were you then?" For the first time, a flicker of anger crossed Harold's mask, and before I could move, he slammed his hand down on the table, making the pen rattle across the paper. "Sign it. Now." The air in the room grew hotter, heavier, and I could feel every ounce of pressure pressing down on me, their eyes boring into my skin. My mother's voice cut through it all, softer than Harold's, but twice as cruel. "We are giving you a chance to be part of this family, Natalie. All you have to do is sign. Just a signature, and all of this can go away." The lie was so sharp it nearly stole my breath. I stared at her, my own mother, and realized there was nothing left of the woman who once kissed my forehead when I had the flu, who once tucked me in at night. She had chosen Harold. She had chosen control. She had chosen erasure. And in that moment, the silence stretched thin like glass ready to shatter. I knew they weren't asking anymore. They were demanding, threatening, escalating towards something darker than paper and ink. I clutched the folder tighter, the edges cutting into my palm, and whispered, "I'm not signing. Not today. Not ever." The air snapped. Mark lunged forward. Harold's hand twitched toward his belt, and my mother's voice rose above it all, icy and final. "Then you'll regret it, Natalie. You'll regret it more than you can imagine." I stumbled back out the door, my heart hammering my skin, clammy with the weight of their stares, and as the door slammed shut behind me, I realized this was no longer about a house. This was war, and the battleground was blood. I told myself I would not go back again, that I had already given them my answer, that no amount of threats or guilt could force me to erase myself from my father's house. But silence was not enough for them. A week later, Mark showed up at my apartment unannounced, pounding on the door until my neighbors peeked out of their windows. His voice was harsh, stripped of brotherhood. "You're coming with me now." Before I could react, Harold appeared at the bottom of the stairs, his presence dark and immovable, and my mother's car idled at the curb. They had come together a united front, as if kidnapping me for their signature was just another chore to tick off their list. I should have screamed, but Mark grabbed my wrist so tightly I felt bones grind against each other. He yanked me down the stairs, and Harold's voice rumbled. "Stop fighting, Natalie. Just do what you should have done weeks ago." My mother didn't even look at me as I was shoved into the back seat, her eyes fixed on the road ahead, as though she were chauffeuring strangers. The ride back to the house felt endless, my pulse racing, the air thick with betrayal, the manila folder pressed painfully against my ribs where I had hidden it under my jacket. When they dragged me inside, the table was ready again, the mortgage deed laid flat, the pen uncapped as though this was a ritual they had rehearsed. My chest tightened, my breath coming in shallow bursts. I said, "I'm not signing no matter what you do." Harold's jaw ticked, and in one swift movement, he reached into his waistband and pulled out the gun. The sight of it made my legs weaken, my skin crawl with cold. He pointed it at my forehead, his hand steady as stone. My mother's voice sliced through the air, calm and chilling. "Do it, Mark. End her." My own mother ordering my death as if it were nothing more than disciplining a child. Mark's fists clenched, his face red, his eyes darting between Harold and Linda before fixing on me with rage. He swung hard, his knuckles smashing into my cheek, and pain exploded across my face as I hit the floor. Blood filled my mouth, warm and metallic, spilling down my chin. My ribs screamed when I tried to inhale a sharp stabbing that made me wonder if something inside had cracked. Harold kept the gun trained on me, his finger brushing the trigger like a lover's touch. "Sign it," he barked, "or you won't walk out of here." My vision blurred as I pushed myself onto my knees, tasting iron, the floor sticky beneath my palms. Mark loomed over me, his shadow blotting out the light, his breath hot with anger. "Just sign, Natalie," he growled, "and this will be over." But nothing about this would ever be over. I spat blood onto the floor, my voice hoarse but clear. "No." My mother's eyes narrowed, her face twisting with disgust, and she hissed, "You've always been too dramatic, always making everything harder. Why couldn't you just be quiet, just disappear?" Mark's fist came down again, crashing into my jaw, snapping my head sideways. The room spun, the edges of my vision fading. I could hear Harold cock the gun, the click like thunder in my skull. I thought, this is it. This is how they erase me. But then the sound of a voice shattered the madness. Mrs. Reynolds, the neighbor from across the street, screamed from outside. "Leave her alone." Her voice pierced the night, followed by frantic banging on the front door. The sudden noise jolted the room. Harold's grip on the gun faltered for just a second. Mark froze mid-swing, and Linda cursed under her breath. The front door rattled as fists pounded harder, and then came the unmistakable wail of sirens in the distance. Everything blurred after that. Harold shoved the gun back into his waistband. Mark grabbed the papers off the table, crumpling them in his hands. Linda's voice hissed frantic commands. "Get rid of her, don't let them see." My knees buckled, my body refusing to rise. The world tilting as though the house itself was collapsing around me. I remember the heavy slam of the back door as someone fled, the cold air rushing in, the pounding in my ears louder than the sirens. Then strong hands lifted me unfamiliar but steady, and I realized paramedics had pushed their way inside. The gurney's hardness beneath me was the last thing I felt before darkness swallowed me whole. When I woke, the light above me was harsh and white, the sterile smell of antiseptic stinging my nose. For a moment, I thought I was still on the dining room floor, my brother's shadow looming. Harold's gun staring down at me, my mother's voice condemning me to silence. But the steady beeping of a monitor reminded me I was alive, though barely. My wrist throbbed in a splint, my jaw ached with each small movement, and my ribs burned every time I drew a breath. A nurse with freckles and tired eyes stood beside me, her voice gentle. "You're safe now, Natalie." Those words should have been comforting. But safety had always been conditional in my life, a fragile thing dependent on moods and manipulation. Still, I let her adjust the IV in my arm, let her hand linger on mine longer than necessary, and for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. Later, 2 uniformed officers stepped into the room, their notebooks ready, their eyes searching my bruises. "Can you tell us what happened, Ms.?" "Carter." My voice cracked, but I forced the words out. My stepfather pointed a gun at my head. My mother told my brother to end me. They wanted me to sign a mortgage deed to give up my father's house. The younger officer shifted uncomfortably, but before he could ask another question, there was a knock at the door and a voice that made my chest loosen. It was Mrs. Reynolds, my neighbor. Her gray hair was disheveled, her glasses askew, but her presence filled the room with a force stronger than Harold's gun. I heard everything she said firmly. I heard Linda tell Mark to end her. I called 911 the second I realized what was happening. Her words dropped into the room like stones, undeniable, irrefutable. The officers scribbled furiously, and for the first time I felt a crack in the wall they had built around me. Someone else had seen. Someone else had heard. I wasn't invisible anymore. The nurse returned later with a folder of discharge instructions, her voice quiet as she explained the fractures, the bruises, the stitches. She said the police would open an investigation, that charges might follow, that I should prepare for questions for court for a fight I hadn't asked for but was suddenly thrust into. My hands shook as I reached for my bag, the familiar weight of my manila folder still inside. The papers were wrinkled, stained with blood, but intact. Proof that I belonged. Proof that I mattered. When the nurse stepped out, another figure entered, a woman in a dark blazer with calm eyes and a presence that radiated steadiness. "I'm Ava Mitchell," she said, sliding a card onto the bedside table. "Legal aid. I heard about what happened. I want to help." I wanted to laugh to tell her she didn't know what she was getting into, that this wasn't just about laws and deeds, but about erasure, about years of being told I was nothing. But when her eyes met mine unwavering, something inside me whispered that maybe she did understand. Maybe she had seen women like me before. Women erased by those who should have loved them. I nodded slowly, my throat too tight for words. She sat beside me, flipping open a folder of her own, and began asking careful questions. "How old were you when you first signed any documents about the house? Did your father ever leave letters or records about his intentions? Do you have proof of financial contributions?" Each question struck against the fog in my mind, like flint sparking clarity. I had answers. I had receipts. I had my father's words scrawled in his unmistakable handwriting. I wasn't powerless. By the time she closed her folder, Ava said quietly, "They tried to erase you, Natalie, but erasure doesn't hold up well against truth. We can fight this." And for the first time since Harold's gun stared me down, I believed maybe I could. The hospital discharged me 2 days later with a splint on my wrist stitches above my eyebrow and a folder of medical records that felt heavier than any cast. Ava insisted on driving me home. Her small sedan smelling faintly of coffee and old paper, the kind of scent that wrapped itself around me like reassurance. She kept her eyes on the road, but her voice was steady. "We need everything you have, Natalie. Every receipt, every letter, every scrap of proof that ties you to that house." I nodded, clutching the manila folder to my chest, its edges frayed, pages stained with my own blood. In my apartment, I spread the contents across the kitchen table. Receipts for property taxes, utility bills, letters my father had written me when I was in college. One sticky note, yellowed with time, carried his looping handwriting. "You are the quiet in this house. Never forget your steadiness." My throat tightened as I pressed the note flat against the table. Ava studied each page, making notes, her pen scratching steadily. Then she looked up. "How old were you when you first signed anything related to this house?" 17, I said quietly, just a few months before my 18th birthday. They told me it was just a formality, that we had to show unity to the bank. Ava's eyebrows lifted, her eyes sharpening. "Natalie, that's huge. You were a minor. That deed transfer could be legally void." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Years of believing I had already lost, that my signature had been the nail in my own coffin cracked open into something else. Possibility. I gripped the edge of the table, my pulse racing. "Are you saying it doesn't count?" Ava nodded firmly. "Not without a guardian cosigner, and especially not under coercion. This could unravel everything Harold and Linda have tried to build against you." I sat back, the room spinning with the force of her words. All those years of thinking I was naive, weak, foolish for signing, and now it turned out the law had been on my side all along. But that wasn't the only twist waiting for me. Later that night, as I dug through an old box I had kept sealed since Dad's funeral, I found something I hadn't touched in years. A small cassette recorder, the kind he used to carry in his tool belt when he wanted to jot down ideas. My hands trembled as I pressed the play button. At first, there was static, the faint hum of background noise, and then his voice grainy but unmistakable. "If you're hearing this, Natalie, it means I'm gone. I need you to know the house was always meant for you. Not because I loved you more, but because you stayed. You showed up. When others ran, you stayed. Don't let them erase you. You deserve this home." My tears came hot and silent, rolling down my face as I clutched the recorder to my chest. His voice was proof not just of his love, but of his intent. Proof that my place in that house wasn't an accident, wasn't a delusion fed by grief. The next morning, I played the tape for Ava. Her eyes widened, and for the first time, her professional mask slipped into something closer to awe. "Natalie, this isn't just sentimental. This is evidence of his intent. Combined with your age when you signed, it's more than enough to challenge them." She added the tape to her folder, labeling it in neat block letters. "Carter Property Case, Exhibit A. My mother's gaslighting. Harold's threats. Mark's violence. All of it swirled in my mind, but now I had something stronger than memory. I had my father's voice from beyond the grave, steady and clear, anchoring me in truth. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat at my table organizing everything. Receipts by year, bills by category letters in chronological order. At the very bottom of the pile, I found a voicemail Linda had left months earlier, her voice sharp with condescension. "Don't make this bigger than it needs to be, Natalie. Family doesn't sue family." Her words, intended to intimidate me, now sat like another nail in her own coffin. I transferred it to a flash drive, labeled it Exhibit B, and added it to the growing pile. My corkboard, once bare, was soon covered with pinned evidence. Photos of bruises taken by the nurse, the sticky note from Dad, the cassette transcript, the voicemail. Strings of red thread connected them, a web of proof stronger than any lie they had spun. I stared at it until dawn exhaustion tugging at my bones, but inside me something had shifted. For the first time, I wasn't just defending myself, I was preparing to fight back. I woke the next morning with the corkboard staring back at me, its red threads crossing like veins, proof of every lie, every bruise, every attempt to erase me. The fear that had weighed on me for years still sat heavy in my chest, but alongside it burned something hotter, sharper. Resolve. I opened my laptop and created a folder on the desktop, naming it "They Want Win." One by one, I scanned every document, every receipt, every note in my father's handwriting. I uploaded photos of the bruises, the medical reports, the nurse's testimony. I converted Linda's voicemail into a transcript highlighting her words, "Family doesn't sue family," as if that absolved her from betrayal. And at the center of it all, I uploaded the cassette recording my father's voice crackling but strong, saying, "Don't let them erase you." When I was done, the folder glowed on my screen like a shield. That same afternoon, Ava met me at her office. The building was red brick, the smell of coffee and printer toner clinging to the halls. She clicked through each file with careful eyes, labeling, organizing, building the skeleton of a case that could finally expose them. "They will push back," she warned me, her voice steady. "They will try to discredit you, smear you, maybe even threaten you again. But the evidence is stronger than their lies." I nodded, my jaw tightening. "I know. I'm ready." And almost on cue, the smear began. The next morning, my supervisor at the dental office pulled me aside, her laptop open to an anonymous email. It contained a video clip, grainy but unmistakably me, sitting in my bedroom months earlier, my eyes red, my voice shaky. Maybe I imagined it all. The clip played on repeat, my words twisted into confession. I remembered the night I had recorded it at Linda's suggestion, her voice telling me it would help to document my feelings. She had promised to edit it to make it clearer. Now I saw her fingerprints all over the cuts, the splices, the distortion. My supervisor looked at me with gentle concern. "We know this is manipulated," she said, "but I had to show you." My blood went cold, but I straightened. "I have the original," I told her. Within an hour, I forwarded the unedited file to HR along with the metadata proving the timeline. By the end of the day, the office issued a memo supporting me and condemning the smear. The attempt to discredit me had failed, but I knew it was only the beginning. That night, I sat at my laptop and made a side-by-side comparison video. On the left, the doctored clip cropped, my voice lowered to sound unstable. On the right, the full 48-minute recording raw but honest me processing grief. At the end, I added a screenshot of Linda's message from months earlier. "Just send me the video, I'll clean it up for you. You'll thank me later." I drafted an email to her with the subject line, "Proof of defamation." Body: "You crossed a line." Here's the difference between a woman grieving and a woman gaslit. Attachments: the comparison video, the metadata, the cease and desist Ava had already filed. I ended with one line: "You should know by now. I document everything." I hit send and waited. Days passed with no reply, but the silence spoke louder than words. She was rattled. In the meantime, Ava moved swiftly. She filed motions to include the original video as evidence, added the smear campaign to the defamation count, and subpoenaed the lawyer who had shown up at the house with Harold and Linda. Each move felt like another brick placed in the wall I was building to protect myself, each step a small victory. But I didn't stop there. I reached out to Sam, a local journalist I had known in college, someone who ran a column on civic accountability. I gave him everything: the audio, the bruises, the medical reports, the doctored video. I told him I didn't want sympathy, I wanted truth. He listened quietly, his pen scratching across a notebook, and when he looked up, he asked only one question: "Are you ready for what comes next?" I thought of Harold's gun, Linda's cold eyes, Mark's fists, and I answered, yes. The courthouse smelled of old wood and over-polished floors, the kind of place where whispers carried, but justice felt slow. Yet that morning, as I stepped through the metal detector with Ava at my side, I knew it would not be slow for me. It would be sharp, public, and final. My palms were slick, but my shoulders were squared, the scar near my eyebrow a reminder of what was at stake. The benches were already crowded with neighbors, reporters, and curious onlookers. I caught sight of Mrs. Reynolds in the second row, her hands clasped tight as though she were holding the weight of the truth itself. On the other side of the aisle, Linda sat in a navy dress, her back rigid, her expression carved from stone. Harold slouched beside her, his jaw set, while Mark shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting around like a trapped animal. When the judge entered the room, rose as one, the silence heavy. Ava opened calmly, her voice clear and factual. She laid out the evidence one piece at a time. The medical records documenting my injuries, the photos of bruises, the receipts proving my financial contributions, the cassette recording of my father's voice declaring the house was meant for me, and the revelation that I had been a minor when coerced into signing documents. Each item stacked like a stone building, a wall too solid for denial. Then came the video comparison played on the screen for all to see. On the left, the manipulated 30-second clip of me whispering, "Maybe I imagined it all." On the right, the full 48-minute recording of me grieving my voice, raw but steady. The metadata timestamps flashed below the message from Linda, asking to edit the video, punctuating the deception. A murmur rippled through the crowd, and for the first time I saw Linda's mask slip, her lips pressed so tightly they turned white. When the defense rose, their attorney tried to paint me as unstable, a bitter daughter jealous of her mother's new family. He said I had a long history of dramatics, that I had fabricated stories, that I was exaggerating bruises for attention. The words washed over me like a script I had already lived. But when he sneered that I was driven by greed, I let out a small laugh, sharp and humorless. The clerk glanced at me startled, but I didn't apologize. "Greed," I said aloud, my voice carrying further than I expected. "My father left me love, not money. You're confusing me with them." The courtroom went silent for a moment before Ava leaned forward, pressing play on the final piece of evidence. The audio, crackling at first, then clear. Harold's voice. "She's always been the weak link." Then Linda's voice, cold as marble. "Do it, Mark. End her." The room gasped, a sound like air rushing from lungs. The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Ms. Carter, is that your voice? Linda said nothing, her gaze locked on some invisible point on the wall. Ms. Carter, the judge, repeated louder. Still silence. It was louder than any confession. Finally, it was Mark who broke. His hands shook as he tugged at his collar, his eyes glistening. Yes, he said, his voice cracking. Yes, it's her voice. She told me to do it. And Harold, he had the gun. The courtroom erupted gasps and whispers, swelling until the judge banged his gavel for order. Mark's shoulders sagged as though the words had broken him. Harold's face flushed red, his fists clenching, while Linda sat frozen, her mask of composure crumbling at the edges. After a recess, the judge returned with his decision. In the matter of Carter versus Carter and Langford, this court finds the original mortgage deed invalid due to the age of the signatory and evidence of coercion. The property is restored in full to Natalie Carter. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. Furthermore, the court acknowledges evidence of coercion, physical assault, and defamation. Harold Langford is hereby sentenced to 2 years incarceration for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. Linda Carter is found guilty of civil fraud and conspiracy, ordered to pay restitution, and barred from any future claim on the property. Mark Carter is sentenced to probation and mandatory therapy, with a restraining order protecting Natalie Carter for no less than 5 years. The gavel struck once sharp and final. For a moment, the sound didn't feel real. My hands rested quietly on my lap, my breath coming shallow but steady. I didn't cry when Harold was led away in handcuffs, his eyes burning holes into me. I didn't flinch when Linda refused to look at me, her face blank with ruin. And I didn't falter when Mark whispered, "I'm sorry," though I knew it was too little too late. Outside the courthouse, the air was warmer, softer. Reporters called my name. Microphones thrust toward me, but I kept walking, my steps measured. A young woman, no older than 20, touched my elbow gently. "Thank you," she whispered, "for showing me I'm not weak." She pressed a small envelope into my hand and slipped back into the crowd. Inside was a note. My sister took everything from me, too. Maybe now I can fight back. I closed my eyes, the weight of it pressing against my heart. Justice had been done, but the healing was only beginning. A month passed after the verdict, but time didn't erase the bruises or the echo of voices that haunted me in sleep. Healing wasn't a sudden sunrise. It was slow, like the hesitant light filtering through half-closed blinds. Some mornings I woke with my jaw aching, my ribs stiff, but there was no fist waiting, no gun pointed, no mother's voice condemning me. There was only silence, and for the first time in years, silence felt like safety. One morning, I returned to the house not for court or confrontation, but for me. The porch creaked beneath my feet, the same way it had when Dad and I stained it together one summer, him talking about integrity like it was something you could hold in your hand. I ran my fingers along the wood grain, inhaling the lingering scent of cedar, and whispered, "Dad, I brought it back." Inside, the rooms were bare. Linda's belongings gone. Harold locked behind bars, Mark forbidden to come near. The air was heavy with dust, but it was mine. I carried a box under my arm filled with photos notes and one small lavender plant Mrs. Reynolds had given me. In the hallway, I hung a single frame, a photo of me at 6 years old, barefoot on the porch swing, laughing at something Dad had said off camera. Beside it, I pinned a note I had found in his toolbox. "This house is yours, Tally." For the first time, the walls seemed to breathe with me instead of against me. A week later, I received a call from the Women's Center downtown. They had read the article Sam published and heard about the trial. They asked if I would lead a writing workshop for women who had survived family betrayal and abuse. At first, I hesitated, the old voice in me whispering, "Who would want to hear your story?" But then I remembered the young woman outside the courthouse pressing the envelope into my hand, her note trembling with pain, but also with hope. I said yes. On a rainy Tuesday evening, 5 women gathered in a small room that smelled of wet jackets and coffee. Different ages, different scars, but the same weight in their eyes. I read aloud the letter I had written, but never shared, titled, "When You Are Erased by Family." My voice shook at first, but when I looked up, I saw tears, nods, whispers of, "That's how I feel too." One woman hugged me after her grip fierce and said, "You didn't just survive. You made space for us." Her words clung to me like armor. Healing was not just mine anymore. It was something I could pass forward. Back at the house, I began small restorations, painting walls not white but soft ivory, the shade my mother once chose after Dad died. It felt honest, not erasing the past, but softening it. I replaced the porch light with a warm glow not too bright, just enough to welcome. Marvin, my quiet neighbor who had called the police, stopped by one afternoon with a pot of lavender. "Thought your steps needed something real," he said, simply leaving it on the porch. I smiled, the kind that spread slowly in the chest. One evening, as I swept the porch, I heard the quick patter of small footsteps. Emma, my niece Mark's daughter, ran up the steps clutching a piece of paper covered in crayon. She looked up at me with wide eyes. "Can I come visit sometimes?" I knelt, brushing a stray curl from her forehead. "Only if you draw me inside next time," I said. She grinned and handed me the drawing. It was a house with stick figures inside, labeled Mom, Dad, Me, and outside, under a tree, another figure labeled Auntie. My throat tightened, but I smiled. "It's perfect, honey. I love it." That night, I sat on the porch swing with a mug of tea, the new light casting a soft glow over the steps. The house creaked with familiar sounds. The wind pressed against the windows like it had something to say, and I listened. Because this house carried ghosts, yes, but also carried proof that I was never the ghost. I was the root, and I was still here. Sometimes the deepest wounds come from the people meant to protect us. But sometimes survival is more than endurance. It's reclaiming what was taken, rewriting the story they tried to silence. If you've ever felt erased by your own family, know this silence is not safety. Speaking, fighting, standing, those are the ways you carve yourself back into existence. I did, and you can too.